Peace and blessings. You're not locked in with the baddest chaplain on the globe, Chris B. First and foremost, I want to thank you so much for subscribing to us on YouTube, on baddestchaplain.substack.com, Spotify, Apple, any and everywhere that you get podcasts. Our guest today is Brian Butler. Brian is president of the Answers in the Room Educational Consulting, BKB LLC, and host of A Conversation with Brian podcast. Brian is an education consultant who has worked with thousands of schools throughout the United States, Australia, and Canada. He's a retired principal who also has experience as a physical education teacher, school counselor, and assistant principal. Brian has a deep understanding of school community dynamics and successful models. Under his leadership as principal of Mason Crest Elementary School in Annandale, Virginia, he received the first annual DeFore Award in 2016. This is an honor named for professional learning communities at work and its process architect, Richard DeFore. And it credits high-performing PLCs that demonstrate exceptional levels of student achievement and is the highest award that a PLC at work school can earn. While Brian was principal of Mount Eagle Elementary in Alexandria, Mount Eagle was recognized as a model PLC at work school. Brian was named the finalist for Fairfax County Public School Principal of the Year for demonstrating superior leadership qualities and creating an exceptional educational environment. His latest book is out now. Every Student Deserves a Gifted Education. 5 Shifts to Nurturing Each Student's Unique Strengths, Passions, and Talents. Without further ado, Brian, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hey, Chris, I'm excited to be here. You know what? When you read all that stuff about me, all it says is that I'm old. That's what it says. It just says I stuck with it for a long time, and I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of great people. But after 35 plus years,
come on,
I'm just old.
That's it. But it's funny you say it that way. But you think about when you first get into teaching, you don't imagine you're going to do all that stuff. Like what for you? What was your mindset? Like you finish a successful career both as a college basketball player and playing internationally, right? And then now you're going into teaching. What was your mindset? Like, what were you thinking? Like, oh, this is what I want to do, or where were you?
Good question. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I got my undergrad degree in communications, communications, but I did a lot with interning at Channel 5, and I wanted to do some radio. My brother Paul helped me do some radio on the Eastern Shore a little bit. But I really did not think about education. My dad was an educator. He was a principal. And I think, for me, I wanted to run as far away from that as possible, right?
I get it.
I wanted to, kind of make my own mark. And I didn't want to, follow in my dad's footsteps. But lo and behold, I came back from playing basketball in England, and I was just substitute teaching, trying to, pay the bills and look for a job in radio and television. And one of the things that, happened is a principal, while I was substitute teaching, said, you know what, have you ever thought about this? And I was subbing in a PE class, a phys ed class. And I said, no, I was not interested, but I was still subbing. One day she came back and she said, we have a long-term sub position, a phys ed position. Would you be interested? And of course I would say yes, because I wanted the money. I needed the money.
I understand.
But I found that I really fell in love with working with students, working with young people. And kind of the rest is history. I went back to school and got a teaching certification in physical education, eventually got my master's in counseling, and then my certification in educational administration. But, when I look back at it, there's no way. But I always, kind of feel, and I think you probably feel this way too, there's always something that happens that points you into a direction that you're supposed to be in.
Right.
And so it could be a person, it could be something divine, it could be anything, but there's always this point where you're like not sure of what you're going to do, but something happens.
Yeah.
Somebody just says, I believe in you, or this is, something that I think you could do. And that person really just kind of sparked an interest. And really, I just felt like this is what I want to do. So I went back to school. I long-term subbed at that school for a while, but I just went back to school, and kind of the rest is history. But I've had a remarkable career. Just people talk about education, and you hear, oh, it's such a tough job, and I could never do that. And I'm not saying it's not hard work and it's not a tough job and it's not grueling, but
Right.
I don't think there's anything more rewarding than to help young people, give them the tools to kind of craft and chart their own destiny.
Yeah.
And so I think, for me, it's just been a great ride.
I love that. I love that perspective on it. Yeah, crafting their own destiny, and that really lends itself to our conversation talking about gifted. This whole idea of like children being gifted, and this sort of like exclusive way that we've thought about gifted
Yeah.
education. Where it says like some are gifted, but not all are gifted.
Yeah.
But tell me about how your perspective on gifted education has evolved throughout the years.
It's interesting because when I became a phys ed teacher and I just started my career, I didn't think much about it because I was in a district that although they identified students with in certain areas as gifted, they didn't separate kids,
Hmm.
and so my first 15 years, I really didn't think much about it. What I did kind of think about was that some kids were gifted and some kids weren't. I always had this angst, like, who gets to say that?
Right, right,
Mm.
right, right.
But in my book, I write about this. I write about how I kind of just fell in line. My first year or two, one of the veteran teachers said, Brian, only 3% of the kids are gifted. And so I started to spout the same thing. It's
Well,
interesting, Chris, in education how we hear things and then we just start to spout it ourselves without
right.
even fact checking.
Yeah, yeah.
There's something that I talk about in my book. It's called the reiteration effect. And what it is this phenomenon that, we will hear something and then when it's said enough by enough people, it becomes kind of this myth, this false truth. And that
Hmm.
happens a lot in education.
No
So
doubt.
what I found out later on in my career when I switched districts and I started to, learn about some other researchers, was that back in the late 1960s, when the U.S. was competing with Russia for dominance in the space race,
Mm.
the U.S. said we need to identify, kids to who we can call gifted, but we're only going to spend 3% of our budget towards that effect.
Mhm.
So people misunderstood that by saying, "Oh, then 3% of kids must be gifted."
Come
Had nothing
on.
to do. There was never any study that said we've identified 3% of the population that was gifted. There's that
Right.
study that they did, but it became like this myth, and it got repeated so often that that's what's been in our lexicon. So
Mhm.
everybody that I ever came in contact with until really recently, and in the last 10 or 15 years, and most people still will spout that. They
Right.
would say, 3% of the population was gifted. The other piece to, this sorting and selecting and ranking of kids kind of came in the late 60s and early 70s when um, schools were really integrating, especially in the in urban centers.
Sure.
And what was happening was there was a huge white flight of middle class families
Right.
trying to move out of the cities. And to combat that, the districts, the regions were creating these special programs
Mhm.
to hold on to those families who were leaving. And so they would create these programs and they would administer different tests or
Mhm.
portfolios for kids to get into those programs. And basically, they were a gatekeeper to underrepresented groups,
Wow, wow, wow.
Black students, Hispanic students, students, any group from poverty,
Right.
poor white students, poor black, poor brown, but this this situation kind of took hold, and parents loved it. The parents who got into those programs
Mhm.
loved it, and it became like their own private school within the public school,
Right.
and it lasts today. I mean, and unfortunately, people really think that this idea that certain kids got it and certain kids don't um, allows for these programs to stay in place.
Mm.
And we know with all the research that's gone on from Carol Dweck to Carol
Right.
Ann Tomlinson. Carol Dweck wrote the book Mindset.
Yes.
Eric Jensen. There are so many researchers that talk about in the right conditions, any kid can rise to the level of performing as if they were gifted. And so my passion, my kind of focus has been helping educators understand that this is possible. We lived it at my former school, and we were able to do it with certain conditions. I
Mm.
think and we'll get into this. I know you have some other questions, but I
No
think
doubt.
what happens is we lay everything on the backs of an individual teacher, and
Come
it's
on.
impossible for an individual teacher to meet the needs of every single child in his or her class.
Right.
It's got to be a team approach. It's got to be an approach
Absolutely.
where we rely on the people, the experts in our building,
Hmm.
on our team. Um, and if we do that, then we have a chance to make sure that we are giving our best to every single student.
No doubt about it. What you're saying, it makes me think about just the ways in which, just in my experience in the classroom, I've seen how children really respond to sort of the energy that's given
Oh yeah,
to them by the instructors, right?
yeah,
Like I remember when I was teaching high school, I had so many kids who would say, I don't respect them, talking about the teacher. Like, I don't
right,
respect that teacher because they don't respect me.
yeah,
And the teacher never, in some rare cases, they actually explicitly said they don't respect them, but it
yeah,
wasn't something that was explicitly necessarily communicated, but it just was the energy. You can tell
yeah,
people have sense. They can tell when they're being respected or cared for in a room. And it makes me think a lot about what you've written, where you assert that our assumptions drive our actions.
yeah.
So I really want, if you will, for you to share with us ways that we can interrupt our own biases, particularly think about the educators and the decision makers in the educational space. How do we interrupt these biases and redirect our assumptions into more constructive actions that create that atmosphere that you're talking about that kids
Sure.
need to thrive?
So let's walk through my book, because if you walk through my book, the parts of my book, and I talk about the 5 shifts to nurture each student's unique strengths, and passions and talents. I think it really captures how we can do that.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, when I talk in my book, I talk about some strategies and some practices. They're not exhaustive. I mean,
Mm,
there's others that you can use, but in my experience, in the work that I've done, these have been the most effective to support that notion that we can find every kid's strengths and passions and gifts.
yeah,
But I think the first thing is to be open, and I talk about this idea of the floor, and it's an acronym for those 5 shifts. The first is F,
mm,
fallacy of the fixed intelligence. We have to,
hmm,
as a profession, really read and learn about the evidence and the research about the brain. We don't do that.
right.
You go to in colleges and in these teacher prep programs, if they do anything about, the science of learning, it's very minimal.
Hmm.
And so if we can actually dispel this myth that some people are born smart and some people aren't, we're just born.
Right,
We get smarter with our experiences, through the activities that are afforded us, the opportunities that are afforded us. Your kids, from the age of birth to now, they've had a lot of opportunities and
right.
experiences. Think about the same kids, or a different group of kids who were born on the same day,
Come on.
who may not have had the same experiences, opportunities to do the things that your kids have had.
Right.
When they get to school, they may seem behind. They're no less intelligent than your
Mm,
children.
right, right.
Don't have all the language, the experiences, the opportunities to find some of the things that they were passionate about.
Hmm.
And so I think us learning about the brain, learning about the parts of the brain, how the chemicals of the brain work, how we can actually in our classrooms really support some of what we call the happy chemicals,
Yes.
help students want to continue to learn, and also the idea of this. I talked about it earlier, the idea of the growth mindset. When we talk
Hmm.
about Carol Dweck's work of persisting and bouncing back
Yes.
when things don't go right, being open to criticism, and so when we start to teach students about this idea that they can get smarter, that
Right.
their brain is malleable, and the more that they persist, failure is actually not a bad thing. It's actually a part of the learning process.
Right.
We teach kids these things, and we teach ourselves. Then we can help kids, open that oyster and say the world is their oyster.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the other piece is, and I really think this is important, is that we as the educators have to change our mindsets.
Mm-hmm.
If we have a mindset, for example, if I'm a teacher and I'm saying I wasn't a math person, I wasn't good at math, how are you going to teach kids to learn math
Come
if
on.
you're saying I'm not a math person,
Right, right.
right? Excuse me, you have to
Okay.
acknowledge that you have a fixed mindset and you have to figure out how I can change my mindset to a growth mindset in order for me to help myself
Yeah.
and then help my kids. Uh, you know, I always think about the idea of being in an airplane and when the flight attendant is saying, if the oxygen comes down, who do you help first? You
Come
help
on. You gotta help
yourself first,
yourself.
right? And so our teachers have to help ourselves first. We have to change our mindsets. We have to put the tools in our toolkit, and then we begin to have that competence
Mm-hmm.
that develops confidence,
Right.
allows us to have those beliefs and expectations for kids to be able to do whatever they want.
Yeah.
With this idea of giftedness, and again, my approach to giftedness is really just different. I say that all kids have gifts. Do all kids have the same gifts? No.
No.
Are kids gifted in everything? No, that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm saying that there are kids who's just have not their unlimited potential has just not been tapped
Yeah.
for whatever reason. And I hear what you're saying. Like some of the kids say, the teacher doesn't like me or the teacher doesn't connect with me.
Right.
One of those pieces is because the teacher doesn't know them. You
Come
know,
on.
when we talk about cultural competence and
Yes. Yes.
we talk about this idea of relevancy.
Mm.
Oh, when you're teaching a lesson, how is this relevant to me? I actually kind of followed you, and I remember you were teaching some lessons and you were doing some rap or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That connects to people, some of those kids' lives, because they're coming from situations where that is important to them.
No doubt.
So you're using rap to actually pull them into the content.
Mm-hmm.
Are we doing those things with all the different content areas? Are we sharing, during our math lessons, uh, people who look like me,
Right.
or come from my culture or my background, who are or mathematicians or scientists or historians or
Come
artists?
on.
Are we doing those things? And a lot of times we're not.
No.
And I think that's so important when we are hoping to make some connections with
Mm.
students. Is one, are we actually understanding their lived experience?
Right.
And again, this is not to lower expectations.
Mm-mm.
It's to bring context to what we're trying to do in terms of their learning. And
Mm-hmm.
so if I know that you're coming from this background, then one, I can actually speak to it. I can make a connection with you. I can ask you. A lot of times our students are the experts in
Yeah.
their neighborhoods,
Of course.
in video games, in music. And so let's give them voice. Let's help center their perspectives, which really allows them to connect. And that's an important piece when we talk about oxytocin and dopamine, those
Yeah.
chemicals in the brain. Oxytocin is huge when it comes to relationships and
Mm.
connecting with adults. And
Mm.
so are we actually, you know, helping kids release some of those happy chemicals
Right.
to really help them be more engaged in their learning. The other piece is we have to be realistic in terms of some of the situations that our kids come from,
Come on.
and knowing that the the chemical that is truly a chemical that allows that prevents them from learning.
Mm-hmm.
um, Really, teachers need to know about what that chemical is,
Yeah.
and help understand that when a kid is coming from a situation, like let's say they're coming from a morning where they're stressed,
Right.
and they've had something happen at home, it's going to take them an hour and a half to kind of regulate.
Oh yeah.
And so that cortisol, which I went blank for a second, that
Uh,
cortisol, the chemical cortisol, if it's not regulated, then they're going to have trouble focusing. They're going
Right.
to have trouble remembering, and those actions sometimes look like the kid can't learn, and that's
Right.
not the case. It's
No.
because that stress, that cortisol, is being released, and when they're in constant state of fight or flight,
Come on.
that cortisol is flooding their brain,
Right.
and it's tough for them to learn. And so we have to know what kind of things we can do, like making sure that we have constant movement breaks in our classroom,
There we
making
go.
sure that we can do some meditation. There's a
Mm.
lot of things that we can do that allows kids to really co-regulate.
Yes.
But what you were talking about early, it starts with relationships. It starts with those
Absolutely.
connections. And if we don't connect with kids, then they're just not going to really buy in
Yeah.
and own their learning.
No doubt about it. Yeah, you said so many things that reminded me of. I had the privilege while I was back in Brooklyn to visit my old high school where I taught for 4 years, and one of my colleagues there, a good friend, she's a math teacher, and she has the school's predominantly Black and Hispanic, and so you
Sure.
have a bunch of like Ellen Ochoa and Benjamin Banneker and all
Sure.
these like historic figures who accomplished what they accomplished through their mastery of mathematics, and
Yeah.
they look like the students in the
I-
classroom. And
Yeah.
just thinking about the power of that, you talked about me using hip hop when I was an English teacher. A funny story: I had a student who I taught him in English, but I also was doing an elective that year called Hip Hop ELA,
Sure.
and he come and it was like ninth period, so it's like technically after school, it's like an extra period on the day.
Yeah.
And he comes in, and he's like, "Mr. Burton, I want you to know I cut class today. I cut school today, but I had to come to see this." And I was like, "I'm honored, but also you need to come to school."
That is pretty funny. Yeah, but you connected with them, and that's important. And so again, that first shift is really us making sure that we help kids learn about the brain, and
Mhm.
that we help them learn about the growth mindset.
No
The
doubt.
second shift is, and this is pernicious in
Yeah,
our culture, and it's not. I don't think it's something that. And again, when I say these things, I say them because I've done them wrong.
I
Like
get you.
throughout my career, I've made mistakes, and we've all. So I'm owning this.
Right, right.
One of the other pieces, the second chapter is called Labels Be Gone.
Come on.
We label kids, the labels that we give to kids, that's what drives our expectations,
No
right? And
doubt.
so, when we call kids low, even when
Yes.
we're using the term minority,
Come on.
this where is she? Um Yvette Jackson, who's right behind me, she wrote this
Yeah.
book, A Pedagogy of Confidence. She used to be the director of gifted services for New York City,
Okay.
African American lady, and she talked about the use of these marginalizing labels.
Yeah, yeah.
And she said, minority. She said we should not be calling our kids minorities. We should not be calling ourselves minorities, because she says, what does minority connotate?
Mm.
Less than.
Less.
We're not
Right.
less than, right?
No.
She's like, so, and she said we should not be calling kids, kids from poverty. She says we
Right.
can use the school dependent students,
Mhm.
because those students depend on school what your kids and my kids get at home, right?
Right, 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 right.
So we should be giving those experiences, those learning experiences to kids in school,
Mm.
because they don't get those opportunities at home,
No doubt.
right? And so the labels that we use, um, and in my book, I have this quote, and it's like, the labels that we use, something like, creates the house that we live in.
Right.
And
Seriously.
so when we're using these labels, it really seeps into educators' minds.
Mhm.
You say low kid, or they're slow, or whatever, or
Right.
special ed kid.
Right. Come on.
We lower our expectations, and what we have to do is get those out of our conversation. Even when we talk about saying a kid is smart, Carol Dweck in her
Yes.
research said you should never tell a kid they're smart, because in the research that she did two different groups. They had a group of kids who they told they were really smart, and they gave them some problems, and the other group they gave some problems, and they just praised their effort. And
Mhm. Mhm.
when the kids started to not do so well in this area, the kids, when they told them they were smart, those kids either said, next time we're going to cheat, or
Wow.
we're just going to stop. Because when you're told that you're smart, that's a fixed mindset. You
Yeah.
believe that you're here, and so they're saying we're just not going to even try because we don't want to kind of be outed.
Yeah, right, right.
We
The
want to. We
imposters.
don't think we're smart. But the
Wow.
people who they said, the kids that they praised their effort, they were so focused on improving and improving and
Right.
improving, even when it was challenging, even when they weren't successful. They got this mindset where we're going to continue to work hard until we're successful. And so this idea of praising effort instead of praising intelligence is really
Hmm.
important for kids. And I have to be honest, I wasn't I didn't know that until the early 2000s when I
Sure.
read her book. Um, and so I think any label that marginalizes a kid and that makes them feel like, one, less than, or two, if I don't live up to this label, then I'm going to be less than.
Hmm.
And we have to start looking at how do we start to kind of limit some of these labels from our vocabulary.
I get you.
Even to the point of, and I talk about it. This is in my book as well. Giving kids nicknames. We have in my former school, we had 36 birth countries and 43 languages, and
Come
so
on.
we had kids who are coming from all over the world, and
Right.
we had kids whose names were hard to pronounce.
Sure, sure.
We need to pronounce them.
Yeah, we do.
When we give them a nickname or we start to just give them the first letter of their name, that is central to a kid's identity.
Oh, come
So
on.
what you're telling a kid when you're asking them, you give them a nickname or you pronounce their name in a different way, that they're not as important. You're
That's it.
otherizing them.
No
These,
question.
these are just little things, Chris, that we can do in our schools
Mm.
that allows us, that
Pardon.
can allow us to build those kind of relationships.
Yeah.
So that's chapter 2. You can ask another question because I'm gonna roll through my book, but go through it and we can still touch on the rest of the book.
I'm with you. I'm with you because you made me think about the ways. And he talked about this a bit about how we hold children to low expectations. But what can we as educators do to disabuse ourselves? Pardon me, of this unfortunate practice, because it feels so much. It makes me think so much about my own work with like implicit bias and teaching
Mhm.
people how to interrupt implicit bias.
Yeah.
So from your vantage point, like how do we interrupt and disabuse ourselves of this unfortunate practice of being like, oh, they can't learn? I've heard so
Yeah.
many educators say they can't learn.
Yeah, and so I think there's a couple things, and there's a book behind me. It's called Ruthless Equity, and this guy named Ken Bloom,
Yeah.
a friend of mine, he talks about we are so high in the sky in terms of equity, and people are using it and misunderstanding it. Equity is right in your classroom. For example, if I'm a teacher and I'm teaching, I have standards. And when we talk about high expectations, one, we have to define high expectations.
Right.
High expectations to me is grade level or better. So
Okay.
I'm not I'm not going to allow any kid in my class who I expect to be an independent adult one day to leave that class without having access to grade level or better curriculum.
Yeah.
Right. And so what happens is we have kids or educators who say, and they call it, um, they're loving the kid.
Hmm.
You can't love a kid into high expectations if you believe that they can't learn.
Come on.
Right. And so what we're saying is, if you go into my classroom or our team, let's say, Chris and Brian and Brianna and Allison are teammates.
Hmm.
We're on the same. We're a teacher team, and we have 100 students on our team. We as a team say, okay, out of our entire curriculum, we know that they might not master the entire curriculum because the curriculum is vast and it's just a lot of stuff to cover. But what we will say is that there are certain things that are so essential in this curriculum that there is no kid who's going to leave this year without mastering those essential grade level essential grade level content. And we as that's foursome as a team are going to make sure that we work together. They're not going to be your kids and my kids. They're all of our kids. We're
Right.
going to work together and identify the most essential curriculum. We are going to unpack that curriculum to make sure that we as us four are
Uh-huh.
crystal clear on the understanding of those standards and those targets within that curriculum, we are going to make sure that we, as a foursome, create assessments around those essentials. And then we're going to come back. We're going to teach the best way we know how. We're not trying to teacher proof. We're going to say, I'm going to go and use my strategies. Chris, use your strategies. Brianna, Allison, use your strategies.
Right.
The best you know how. But then we're going to give that assessment that we all created together around those essentials. We're going to come back together, and then we're going to look at that data, because
Mm-hmm.
what we're going to do is say, okay, we said these are all of our kids, and we said that they have to master these essentials. They might not master everything else,
Right.
but these essentials, if they master these, then that's the minimum. They're going to have a chance to be successful in the next course or grade level.
Gotcha.
And so the students that Chris worked with, they got 95% on these essential skills.
Yeah.
The students that Allison and Brianna worked with got 95% as well.
Right.
Students that Brian worked with got 65%. Now, hear me now. This isn't about ranking teachers. It's
Right.
not about sorting teachers. It's not about evaluating teachers. This is about, okay, we said we're trying to improve our practices. So if Chris and Brianna and the students that they were working with, got 95% on the agreed upon essential standards that they as a team said are so important, what do you think Brian should be doing when at that table? Should Brian be saying, "Oh, I'm a terrible teacher.
Right.
I don't want to share my data"? No, Brian should be saying, "Chris, Allison, Brianna, can you walk me through your lessons?
Come
Can you
on.
put more tools in my toolkit? Can I come and observe you? Can you come and teach the class so I actually can, see what you're doing? Because we said these are our kids, and
Right.
we're trying to get them all across the finish line. So that's the first thing is putting more tools in my toolkit. The second thing is we need to be willing to share kids. If we're at the same grade level, if these are all of our kids,
Right.
it's just like the medical model. It's like, okay, Chris has the antidote. So maybe during this intervention block, I send the students who weren't successful to Chris. Chris sends me the students who were successful, and I can teach them extensions.
Yeah.
This is how we start to talk about equity. Equity is not just pie in the sky.
Right.
Equity is right in our classroom. And so
Love that.
if I teach, if I say that kid is too low and I don't give him or her access to grade level essential curriculum, and Chris, answer this for me. If
Okay.
I teach a kid below grade level all day, every week, every month, all year long, where are they going to end up at the end of the year?
Below grade level.
Below grade level. But that's what we do.
Right.
We pull kids out and say they're too low to do it.
Yeah.
And so we pull them out and give them below grade level curriculum all
Right.
day, and they never catch up.
No.
Now, am I saying that we don't fill in gaps? No. Yeah, I am saying, yeah, we fill in the gaps that they might be missing, and we give them access to grade level curriculum. It's not either or.
Right.
They'll never catch up. And that's what's happened to us. And that's why we have such a gap, is because our schools have never been set up to operate like professional learning communities, the true professional learning communities, where we actually are sharing practices and that we are creating schedules that intervene for kids who might have some gaps, but we also make sure that they don't get pulled out when it's time for them to have access to those essential grade level skills, because that's how we close the gap.
Absolutely.
That's equity.
Yeah. No, that's brilliantly said. Brilliantly said. I'm curious. How would you say? Because I often think about the ways in which life will hand us certain trials or difficulties, and when we handle them well, they give us they fill our wells of empathy that allow us to now say, I know how to address this problem. So someone who has to deal with this deficit in one area, they're like, because I know what that's like, now I know how to create an abundance in another area. So with that being said, how has your experience as a student informed your pedagogy? Like what about your journey as a student informs the work that you're doing now?
I think my journey, and I think it goes back even further. My journey just in my family gives me a passion, because in the book as well, I write born in the right family, and it's not a judgment, because I believe that every single parent loves their kids. We just love in different ways, and some of
Mhm.
us have resources to provide. But I say that because I had struggles early on when I was in primary grades, and I struggled to learn how to read. But my dad was a reading teacher. My mom
Yeah.
was, very supportive in the education realm as well. And there was always a focus on education, and them giving me a lot of background knowledge. And so I was able to catch up pretty quickly. I know that
Mhm.
they wanted to retain, not my parents, the teacher wanted to retain me early on, and my parents said no, because we got this. But what
Yeah.
I'm saying is, I was lucky. It should not take for a kid to be born in the right family for
Get
them
you.
to have what my friend Mike Maddles calls a life filled with endless possibilities and opportunities.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's where my passion is. It's like, okay, we are the educators. I did a session about 3 weeks ago with some educators in Arkansas, and I asked, how many years have you all been in the profession? And people raised their hand, and I added up all those years, Chris, and it was 1,233 years of experience in.
Goodness.
Like, think about that. If
Right.
there's that much experience in that room,
Yeah.
what can't we figure out for kids?
Seriously.
Seriously,
Seriously.
what can we not figure out for kids? If we work together and we get rid of our egos,
That
our,
part.
our system has been set up for us to be, one room schoolhouses, or, I'm just the king or queen of my castle.
Right, right.
Rid of that. And we have to really say, okay, is the answer is in the room, or the room is the answer.
Uh,
And we have to share our knowledge, our skills, our experiences, our expertise, and say, we're going to make this work for every single child. Does it work every day perfectly? No.
right.
If a kid comes to us far behind, or they come to us with, certain deficits, it's going to take time, but we can get there.
Yeah.
We just have to be persistent. We have to make sure that we believe
Right.
that we can get there. At the beginning of most of my talks, I asked this question: do we believe that it's our moral obligation to treat other people's children, meaning people, the kids that are coming into our school, to
Uh-huh.
have the same expectations of those kids as we would for our own kids, or our loved one's kid, or niece or nephew or grandparent,
Sure.
our grandchild? I've never had any educator say no. So if
Mm.
that's the case, what would you do for your own child?
Right.
You would run through the wall. You would
No
run into
question.
a burning. You would run into a burning building.
No question.
Do anything. So if you're telling me, educators, that we are truly in loco parentis, that's what we are about, then, and that these are truly our kids, then we should be willing to do anything. But
Yeah.
we traditionally have not done that. We as a profession, and I love educators. I think we deeply care for kids. I think
Mhm.
we want the best for kids, but we've been put into a system that hasn't been designed to educate all kids.
Right.
And people say the system's broken. The system's doing what it was supposed to do. What it was
Designed.
designed to do.
Right.
So my thing is, we need to create our own system
Come on.
that allows for this work to be done for all kids.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where sometimes we have to have a little bit more courage and
Sure.
say, um, and again, I'm saying this because I wasn't always that person.
Get you.
Sometimes I would just go along to get along, but then
Right.
at some
Right.
point, when I became an administrator, I'm like, I'm responsible for all these people, or we are together,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we have to make sure that they have the lives that I would want for Allison and Emily.
No
Um,
doubt about it.
and so that part, when I talked about that teamwork, that is really chapter 3. It's called
Mhm.
the obligation of teams. It's about collective teacher efficacy, this collaborative culture. And if we can create that collaborative culture, um, working on the right work,
Mm.
then we can make this happen. Have you ever heard of John Hattie?
No,
Um,
I haven't. I have not.
John Hattie he's done the most exhaustive study, synthesis of educational research in the history of the world.
Come
Um,
on.
his, and I think it's his. He is, and I'm trying to look at my. I want to make sure I have it. He has synthesized over 130,000 studies, over 400 million students, and his research is called Visible Learning. And he looks at 250 influences and factors that affect student achievement.
Okay.
He ranks them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And he said that, and so what he looked at is, you know, things that are inside of school, things that are outside of school that affect
Sure.
student achievement. Pretty much anything is positive
Mm.
in terms of student achievement. Kids can grow by being in a teacher's classroom. Actually, in his study, kids grow 0.10 standard deviations just by being alive. They learn something.
Just,
In 1 year, they just learn something just
r-
by observing
right.
their environment.
It just existing. Yeah.
Yeah. But what he said is, in his study, he said in the average teacher's classroom, in 1 year, kids grow 0.40 standard deviations. I'm not going to get too deep, but just think about
Sure.
this 0.40. So in his study, he said the number one thing on his list was this idea of collective teacher efficacy. He said if teachers work in such a way where they share their practices, they're transparent, they're vulnerable, they share their failures, they share their success with each other. He said that you can get a kid to grow 1.52. That's 4 times
Whoa.
the rate of an individual teacher.
Yeah.
You can close that gap because what he's saying is you're actually you can accelerate learning 2, 3, 4 years in 1 year.
Come on.
And that's what we did. In my old school, we would have kids growing 2, 3 reading years in 1 year. But you have to do the right work. You have to make sure that you're not pulling them out, you're not labeling them, you're working in such a way where you're identifying essential skills that all kids must master. But we don't do that
Right.
systematically. In one teacher's classroom, that one teacher might do something like that or do
Mhm.
that, but then it's an educational lottery. What about the other 3 teachers?
Come
So
on.
we have to make sure that we are sharing our practices and our wisdom and skills with each other to make sure there is no educational lottery. So
Right.
that's chapter 3. Chapter 4 is this idea of those 7 strategies. I'm not going to go through all 7 strategies
All good.
that I talk about with teachers, but I say there are seven strategies, and I call them superpower.
Yeah.
And one of the strategies that I will talk about is starting with strengths. How many teachers, no matter who the kid is, you start with what are their strengths?
Yeah.
That doesn't normally happen.
Right.
We might have some we get their folder from the previous
Come
year,
on.
and we see, oh, some have strengths. Oh, these kids they have all these deficits, or they
Right.
can't do this. We start with can't do's.
Of course.
And so when we start with can't do's, think about what goes into our head. This
Right.
kid can't do. This
Can't
kid
do.
has a history of can't doing.
Right.
Well, if it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy,
No.
the kid
doubt
can
about
feel it. And so the kid says, I can't do anything. What am I good at?
Come
And so
on.
what we're saying is start with strengths. Start the year with strengths. Don't look at that folder from last year yet.
Come on. Right.
And have some time with your kids, build some relationships so you can see what this kid is good at or what they might be interested in.
Right.
And so one of my 7 superpowers for teachers is starting with strengths, because that's really important. There's some others in terms of the relationships, making sure that we give them opportunities to be a part of traditional gifted experiences, like um, uh, um, the Socratic seminar,
Yes.
document-based questioning, experiential learning, all the
Right.
things that some of the kids in quote gifted land get. We want to make sure that all kids get those.
Sure.
Some people will say, well, these students aren't ready for a Socratic seminar. And we say, well, they are if we work in the right way.
That's it.
For example, if I have some English learners, or if I have some students who have a special ed designation, or they need special education services, then the special ed teachers at the table with the grade level teachers, the EL teachers at the table, and those teachers are sharing their strategies to make sure that these kids can access Socratic seminar.
No doubt.
They might need some front loading on the vocabulary.
Right.
Some of the students who might have behavior challenges might need to have some academic discourse modeled for them.
Right.
And so we have to predict what they need in order to access what traditionally has only been for kids with the gifted label.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to just throw kids in sink or swim.
No.
But we are going to say they have they have the right to have access to these higher level thinking experiences, just like any kid.
Of course.
And that's why we got to get rid of a lot of these labels. And I'm not saying that some of the labels aren't necessary because they drive some of the funding,
Sure.
but in terms of the actual work we do in the classroom,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
labels are not helping us at
Yeah.
all.
And we're seeing the label and we're not seeing the child, and that's a big problem.
Exactly. Yeah. And one of my friends, Sarah Schewel, she said, "Stop barcoding kids.
Come
We're like
on.
barcode, right?" And so
Yeah.
then that automatically that's what you think because just like you, me, anybody, we have certain strengths. We have certain things that we need support with.
Of
And so
course.
kid by kid, skill by skill, that
Right.
we have to drill down and say, okay, this kid is not good at 2x2 addition. This kid is not strong at 2x2 addition. This student has a special ed label. This student does not. Wouldn't it be good to put them together and give them support? But no, we separate kids based on the
Right.
label instead of based on the skill.
Exactly. And you saying that makes me think about, like, when I was a special education teacher and we had the ICT, which is like the inclusive classroom
Hmm.
style of it. It made me think about, at its best, it should create the environment that you're talking about where students are able to trade each other's strengths.
Sure.
But too often, because of that deficit lens, you
Yeah.
saw people worry about, oh, the top kids in the class are going to coast. And they're
Yeah.
gonna, and the bottom kids are gonna bring everyone down. Like, it was never viewed as like an opportunity for everyone to thrive.
Exactly. And I think you said it perfectly. And I think one of the things we have is when we say the top kids and the bottom kids, what are we measuring? Are we
Right.
just doing academics? Because that leads us into my next session when I talk about fostering these essential attributes for students. So, like, we might have a kid who may struggle in some areas of academics, but may persist in the arts,
Oh yeah.
music, or in phys ed. Do we know his strengths in that area or her
Come
strengths in
on.
that area? And so, in my former school, when we would get our teams together, we would talk about each student. And we would start with, okay, what are their strengths? Have we actually, and we would have like a Google Drive where it went to all the teachers, and we would say phys ed, art, music, or whatever their
Yeah,
special,
yeah.
list their strengths
Yes.
because a lot of times classroom teachers, if a student wasn't doing well academically,
That's
then
it.
again, a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like
No
they
doubt.
lower the expectations. But when they see that they're doing well in those other areas,
Come on.
then that should give them some pause to say, oh, I might need to learn from
Right.
the art teacher or the music teacher
Oh
or the phys
yes.
ed teacher. What are they doing or how to build relationships? What are they doing to keep these kids engaged? It takes an entire school
No doubt.
to really figure out how we can make sure that all kids are being successful. The other thing, one of the other attributes is, precise thinking and communication,
Mhm.
self-control, empathy, curiosity,
Yeah.
optimism. These attributes are the attributes that are going to make and help kids be successful,
Right.
not passing a test. When I ask, or anybody, ask an employer or prospective employer, what do you want for your employees coming in?
Yeah.
These are the skills that they want. They're not asking me did they pass the state test.
No.
And I'm not saying that it's not important because we have to. It's not either or, but these are the most important skills.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think so. Teaching students those superpowers, those
Mm.
attributes, behaviors, skills, attitudes, I really think will help them become successful. And the state tests and the other things are going to take care of themselves because we're giving them the self efficacy, the belief,
No
the
doubt.
expectations in themselves that they can do anything that they put their minds to.
That's it. That's entirely it. Yeah. I think about the amount of kids I had who were in the special education program who were amazing at the arts or
Yeah,
amazing
yeah,
at kinesthetic learning. There's so many different ways that
exactly.
we prioritize, because even as we were describing it earlier, I was thinking it also requires a sort of like a flattened hierarchy in terms of what classes are important in the school,
Yes,
because we know
yes,
that we don't value the arts programs and
that's
physical
what I'm talking
education
about.
as much as we value like science and even
Yes,
the humanities.
yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So when I'm talking about gifted education, so we didn't talk before this, but it's like a segue into my final chapter. My final chapter is entitled are resistance, but also inspiration. So resistance is, how do we help people who resist this new approach, my approach?
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to help them get on board? And so the idea of Anthony Muhammad and Louise Cruz
Yeah.
wrote this book called Time for Change, and Anthony Muhammad wrote a book called Transforming School Culture. And what they say is resistance is not bad. It's not about good or bad. It's not, good versus evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's productive versus unproductive organizational behavior,
Makes sense.
right? And then, but they also say there are reasons why people resist. There are logical reasons why people resist.
Right.
Which you and I know that education has this pendulum, and we have all these initiatives,
Oh,
and people,
goodness.
or if somebody's had 4 or 5 principals in 6 years,
Right.
people will resist because, one, they don't trust the leader.
Exactly.
Because they're like, you're going to be here for a year, and you're going to be gone. So people resist when they don't trust the leadership.
Right.
People also resist when they don't know why. They don't have evidence. They haven't been able to sit down and study the research. And so we have to get people together to build shared knowledge, to learn together about the latest research and evidence, so we can say, okay, let's stop debating opinion. Let's stop making decisions based on who's been here the longest or who's got the loudest voice. Let's make decisions based on reading this evidence together and then coming to a conclusion based on that evidence. And so that's a logical reason why people resist, because they don't know why. The other reason why people resist change is because we have all these initiatives, but we don't give people the proper time,
Mm-hmm.
training, support to do what we're asking them to do.
Right.
So if I am a elementary school teacher and we have this new reading program, and some people know it and some people don't, but you're saying we need to implement it right away.
Right.
And I'm like, but we haven't had the training. We haven't had the time, the support to be able to do. I'm going to resist. Those are logical reasons why people resist.
For sure.
And the leaders have to know, because these are logical reasons why people resist.
Yeah.
Then I have to support their need. I have to support their why.
Come
I have
on.
to support their trust as a leader. One of the things that we said is we were the lead mistake makers. We're going to be transparent.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to disperse leadership. We don't know everything. We know that the teachers are the experts, so we're going to let you all lead a lot of this stuff.
Right.
So you have to get rid of your ego as a leader at some point.
Come on.
And say, we are a team, and I'm going to build trust in that way. Now, if we do those 3 things, if we articulate the why, and we read the research, we build trust, and we're transparent, and we give people the proper time, training, and support, those are logical reasons. If we do all those things and people still don't do it and say we're going to resist, then that's illogical.
100%.
And so then we have to say, as the leaders, you're going to do it because this is your professional responsibility.
Come on.
And we have to move forward. We can't wait for you.
No.
See, what happens is, and so these are 4 tools. The first 3 are great tools. The 4th tool is a hammer. You have to do it.
Yeah.
But what happens is many leaders start with the hammer.
Of course.
And then people just say, okay, I'll do it, but I'm just going to comply.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to commit to this. I don't believe in it, but I'll do it because you tell me to. You don't want people just to comply. No. But again, if you do these first 3, and then there's a few people who still say no, then you have to say you have to comply. Right. But you do the first 3, most people will get on board. Most people are reasonable. Yeah. But we haven't done that. There are so many systematic things that we can do. And that's from Anthony Muhammad's work and Louise Cruz's work in terms of resistance. And so the last piece is, when you talked about this, there are other disciplines that kids can thrive in, the arts and music and whatever. So the last piece is finding inspiration in the success of others.
Yeah.
And I highlight 4 school districts, and I highlight 4 individuals who are very successful, and they all talk about how they were successful because of all the support they've gotten. Right. One guy, his name was Andrew Mallon, and Andrew said that he had a hard time learning how to read. He said he's an adult and he still needs assistance with reading.
Come on.
But when he loved carpentry, and his parents built him a carpentry studio in their house.
Come on.
Like in their garage. He got to high school and he wanted to take the upper level carpentry class, and the high school said no. And his parents advocated. His parents said, okay,
right,
they went to they said, if you don't let him take this, he loves carpentry. This is the only thing keeping him in
Passion.
school. They said, if you don't let him take this, he's going to drop out of school.
Mm.
Fast forward, the high school finally relented and let
Yeah.
him take that carpentry class, and he stayed in school. He became a carpenter, but now he's a world class tree sculptor. He's one of
Come
the top
on.
5 tree sculptors in the world,
Whoa.
and so that's his passion.
Yeah.
Carpentry. And so, like you said, we have to flatten it. I don't like white collar or blue collar.
No.
Every occupation is honorable, and whoever's doing that is an expert,
Yeah.
right? And so that's again, when I talk about, gifted education for all,
Hmm.
it's giving kids these attributes, making sure that the teachers have these strategies, but allowing kids to find their way, and find their
Yes.
passion, and find their strength.
That is really, no, that's extraordinary. That's really extraordinary. I want to ask you, what would you say is your hope for the world in this moment? Like thinking about education, thinking about, this is clearly your life's work. You've poured so much into so many different educators around the world. What would you say is your hope for the world in this particular moment?
There's a lot of big hopes and little hopes. I think the biggest hope is for peace.
Yeah,
I think the way we get there, I don't have the answer to that, but I
sure.
think, through education,
Yeah,
through allowing, kids and people to obtain knowledge from different sources, allows us to think critically, and
yeah,
to really start to think about, how we want to contribute to this world. Um, my hope is that we start to realize that we are much more alike, that we start with our what we have in common
yes.
than, our differences,
Hmm.
because as we try to do, in our schools, is that we try to help people understand the basic conditions of true humanity, that we are alike in many ways. Because once we know that we are alike in many ways, then we truly actually can have a conversation about differences.
For sure.
A lot of times we start with differences,
Right.
and it's hard to get to how we're alike.
Hmm.
But if Chris and I, talk about the New York Knicks, I won't go down that road too much, but if we talk about basketball,
Yeah,
we talk
yeah.
about in common, that we find this bond,
Right,
then we can start to have a conversation that may be that we may not agree on,
right.
but it also gifts us. Your
Yes.
your differences gift me,
Come on.
and mine gift to you, because
Yes.
now I've learned something more,
Right.
and that's okay. And I think that's so. My hope is that we start to, you know one conversation at a time, because I think that's what it's going to take, one
Yeah.
person at a time.
I love that.
Um, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar I'm a huge fan of his, and he has
Yes.
a podcast, but he also has a store. And I bought two of my friends a shirt, and on the shirt is Kareem and Bruce Lee,
Yes.
and the saying says, "Find a friend or a person who does not look like you and make a friend, or
Yeah.
find a person who has a different opinion and make that person your friend."
Yeah.
That's, one conversation at a time. I think that's what's going to do it. But, the hope in the meantime is that we can at least find some humanity and peace, and, stop seeing each other as other and less than, because that's where these wars come from. And then
Yeah.
we're killing each other, and we have to realize that we're humans,
Yeah.
and that there's no other species like us.
Truly.
And so that is my hope.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't have I don't have the answer for the entire world, but I think one conversation at a time can at least start it.
Gets us on the right road for sure. Because as you're speaking, it made me think about how hard it is to truly hate people who you have spent time with and have
Yeah,
learned about.
yeah,
Ignorance fuels hatred, but like
yeah,
if you have knowledge about a person and spend time with them, it's going to be hard to fully hate them.
yeah. It's almost impossible. I mean, think
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, I mean, and then And I think that's why people don't want to get to know some people
Precisely.
because they know. Like I saw it. I heard a talk show person saying, "I don't want to get to know that person on the other side of the aisle because I think I would like him. So I don't want to know because I hate his policies."
Yeah.
Think about that.
Right.
Like so you're gonna not even have a conversation.
Right.
You're not even gonna because you hate the person's policies, but maybe your lens into their world once you get to know them will give you an understanding of why. Doesn't mean you're going to change your
No.
behavior,
Right.
change your stance on your policies, but it's also going to give you a lens into that person's humanity.
Hmm.
You may know that you may realize this person's a great humanitarian who doesn't talk about it
Right.
and
Right.
helps. You have no idea.
That's really the truth. That's really the
So,
truth. I want to ask you this question that I ask every guest who comes on the show. I want you to imagine that you're hosting a dinner. And you
yep.
can invite 4 guests, dead or living, fictional or real people. Brian, who are you bringing to dinner?
You know, it's interesting you asked this. Sometimes somebody asked me this question before, Chris, and they were surprised that I didn't, talk about like historical figures or some famous person.
Mhm.
The 4 people that I would want to have dinner with, because I have to be honest, I didn't, as an adult, I didn't know them because they were gone, were my grandparents. Like
Yeah.
I never met my dad's dad. He died before I was born.
Right.
My grandmother on my dad's side, I didn't see very often. I
Yeah.
mean, I can remember probably seeing her 6 times in my life.
Right. Right.
Um, my mom's, we spent much more time on my mom's side, so I knew my mom's mom and dad, but my mom's mother died when I was like 12 or 13,
Okay.
and my mom's dad died when I was playing basketball in Europe, so I was like 21.
Right.
But I
Right.
never really sat and had a conversation with them.
Sure.
But I would love to sit and have a conversation with them. Not even a conversation. I would love just to sit and just hear their perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
My dad's, think about this. My dad's dad was born in the 1800s.
My goodness.
Think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that was literally a stone's throw from
Right.
our people being enslaved.
That's
Like,
it.
so I would love to, and they all had like second, third, fourth grade educations,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
but they valued education.
Sure.
And I tell a story, but I'm not going to tell it today. But they valued education so much that my dad's parents lost their right to sharecrop the land because he went to college, and the landowner said
Goodness.
that if you go to college, then I'm gonna kick your family off the land.
Wow.
So that
Wow.
value of it. So think about. Well, that's why enslaved people were not allowed to
To
learn
learn.
because they
Right.
were afraid of what was going to happen, which we
Yeah.
know. Um,
Exactly.
I would actually, so those 4 people, but I would also like to know about some of our historical figures, some of our scientists, astrologers
Hmm.
who were African before enslavement.
Yes.
Because when we were Africans were enslaved, that's not our history.
No.
That interrupted our history.
Precisely.
So I'd like to know, and I said something. I was having a conversation with my buddy Mike Brown the other day, and we were talking about literally how our hard drive was erased
Yes.
because for 400 years or 260 or 280 years, we weren't allowed to read. We weren't allowed to, our history was erased. Our
Right.
memories, generation after generation, it was, systematically erased from our memory.
Right.
And so I would like to know and speak to some of the people who were scientists and
Exactly.
astrologers from Africa, and so they could tell us what happened
Yeah. For
and
sure.
how successful they were. And so not so much we hear a lot about our pain and our struggle, and that's part of
Of
our
course.
journey.
No
We're
question.
so much more than that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, so I know that the book is out now. Where do you want folks to go to purchase
Yeah,
this book? And if you
they
hadn't
can
heard
go to
before, it's every
they can go to Amazon.com. They can go to BarnesandNoble.com. If anybody wants a signed copy, they can go to BrianButler.info. That's my website, and they can
okay.
follow the prompts, and I will sign a copy and send them a copy directly. But if they want something really quickly, they can go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble. But again, they can go to brianbutler.info on my website, and they can order a copy from me directly.
Perfect. So we're gonna send folks directly to you. BrianButler.info. Amazon's gonna be fine. Barnes & Noble's gonna be
Yeah,
fine.
it's all good.
Let's send them to you.
Right.
And also with the podcast, a conversation with Brian. Where can we listen to that?
It's on YouTube, Spotify. I am on. I think that's about it. So it's YouTube and Spotify right now. Yeah,
Cool.
but I am on hiatus until January. But I've had some great guests, and
nice.
So you're going to need to return the favor and come on my podcast, Chris, and talk about your journey, because you've had an extraordinary journey, and I really respect everything that you do and what you've been through and how you really continue to look at the world in such a positive manner. So you got to come on my podcast.
I'll be happy to. I'll be more than happy to. That'd be a great way to kick off 2024,
yes.
man. Let's go for it.
Come on. All right.
Here for it. What you all have heard Brian Butler's wonderful, wise words. Please go out and make sure that you purchase a copy of the book. Every student deserves a gifted education. 5 shifts to nurturing each student's unique strengths, passions, and talents, available. BrianButler.info, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and also listen to his podcast, A Conversation with Brian, available on YouTube and Spotify. And make sure that you've subscribed and liked to this podcast. Once again on YouTube, it's on Spotify, we're on Substack, Apple Podcasts, any and everywhere where you're listening to podcasts. I want to thank you so much to our wonderful guest, Brian Butler. Thank you so much to you all for watching and listening. And until next time, be wonderful, be blessed, be kind, and be loving out here, okay? Much love. Thank you all so much, and talk to you soon. Peace.